Okay, let's go ahead and have a conversation about accessible design. In the actual business world, I'm seeing more and more emphasis on accessibility and just having a general good understanding of it, along with, just being able to talk intelligently about it and work it into your design practices as time goes on is going to go a long way and give you, just another tool and something to make yourself stand out against someone that hasn't been exposed to this kind of stuff. So what I want to go through with you is I'm just going to kind of click through this site that goes through so much detail about this. I'm just going to kind of click through and show you what's in the site and how to get around and what maybe you should read through and look at just to get an overview if you haven't had some of this before. And then I want to show you very specifically some of the color tools, just as important when you're creating all of your imagery for your homepage, besides making sure that it's appropriate in terms of file size, so pixel dimension and compression, so that Google will read it appropriately and give you good rankings. So if you have a slow loading site, you're really going to get pushed down. That's a really major factor of their algorithm right now. More and more accessibility is being taken into consideration. That's just one of the building blocks as we build sites. Just things constantly evolve and change that we have to deal with and worry about. So this is something you should probably just bookmark or be aware of how to get to it. This is i-c-u.info. This site is built to work appropriately for all of these different aspects of universal design and accessible design in terms of color theory and layout and screen readers and captions, and all of these things are kind of built into this site. So when we're talking about color theory, which is really what I want to focus on here, is there's two major aspects besides just colorblind or color deficiency settings, is kind of checking for those and just being aware of the different types of ways people might view the colors on your site out there. Another big one is contrast, is being sure that you have, so like for example, if you put a bunch of, I don't know, yellow text on an orange background or something like that, it's going to be really hard to read for people that have a harder time seeing contrast. And it also depends on different screen sizes, that having proper contrast really makes a difference on how readable things are on a smaller screen on a phone as it breaks down and things like that. So this site in general, there's so much content in here. I'm going to give you an overview and kind of click around into each section and show you what's in here and let you know what's important to learn a little bit more. So I'm going to click on index here because this is where it basically kind of shows you a sitemap of everything in this site. All right, we've got the About ICU, some ICU presentations, and then universal design guidelines. Down in here is more of the nitty-gritty examples and the tools and things that I want to talk about. But just very quickly, I want to click through this. So if we go to About CU, you can learn just kind of, here's Bill here, this awesome picture. And you can learn a little bit about what this is, why it was created, the different licensing, Epic project, all this stuff. Let's see, usage rules and authors and contact. All this is basically kind of usage of the site as if you were an institution using this site as your rules. Let's see, ICU overview. Okay, there's a really nice presentation in here in the overview that Bill and Susan put together, and it goes through like this. ICU is actually an acronym: inclusive, socio-emotional, entertaining, and universal. These are all aspects of universal design, and making all media try and follow as best as you can to be able to, have your designs as accessible as possible. So there's quite a comprehensive slideshow here. Let's see, how many slides are there actually? Yeah, so this is a 47 slideshow. I'm not going to bore you with going through all of it, but it's not a bad idea for you just to thumb through and kind of understand and see some examples of what we're talking about just from kind of a macro level, looking at different elements in different types of projects and how they associate to universal design. All right, so that is a nice little overview here under the ICU overview. So this whole About is kind of like legal and explanation about kind of what's behind this site. And then once we get into the presentations here, the ICU overview, I believe, has the entire presentation. And as we go into inclusive design, socio-emotional, entertainment, and universal design, I believe each one of these sections kind of dives into a specific area and then jumps you to a specific spot in the presentation, or has a smaller version of the presentation that just talks about that specific area. So I'll kind of glean over these real quickly. Socio-emotional, what does that mean? How are people thinking? How are their brains working when they look at our designs? Entertainment design, as far as different things you want to keep in mind depending on what you are actually designing for. If you're designing something for educational purposes or for just entertainment purposes versus presentation purposes. And underlying all of this is a term called universal design. If you haven't heard this term before, it's basically the idea that instead of necessarily thinking in terms of accessibility, like color blindness, and okay, first I have to go in and make this okay for colorblind people. Then I have to go in and make this okay for blind people. Then I have to go in and make this okay for hearing impaired people. The idea of universal design is that universally we should be designing in such a way that covers all of these aspects, just as kind of the core of the design, not necessarily thinking, the idea, the premise behind universal design is that good design will cover these things in a way that helps everyone, doesn't just single out, these different deficiencies. The example that Gene Hanks likes to use, back like decades ago, all of the curbs on all of our streets were all just perfectly, like, none of them had any gradation to them. They were all just up curbs. So like even on corners, if you were riding your bike around, you'd have to bunny hop up onto the curb. You couldn't just smoothly ride up onto it. At some point, I believe in the 70s, there was a big push because none of the sidewalks were wheelchair accessible, right? And there was a big push across the country to create these different like spots on the curbs, like where there's corners and different areas where it actually gradate down into the street. And it was originally done for the purposes of wheelchairs. So it made people with wheelchairs more easily be able to just wheel down the sidewalk and cross streets without needing help. But it ends up to be a very good case study in universal design, because even though that was the initial intention, there has been countless kind of benefits from doing this for all other walks of life besides just for wheelchairs that kind of came out of that. So it's kind of one of the examples that Gene Hanks likes to use for universal design. And so a lot of this about and presentation stuff is a lot of theory. So it's good to kind of thumb through and understand what we're talking about here. And then down here under the universal design guide, we have some more theory and kind of data under general guidelines, and then specific guidelines is where we get into some tools and a lot of examples and things to look through, right? So as I look through here, disability is defined. So this goes through like hearing impairment, blindness and low vision, color blindness, photophobia, mobility, speech, cognitive, temporary, situational limitations, like just low lighting and things like that. These are all just overall considerations about how individuals may have some kind of, difficulty looking at your media, looking at your content because of these different possibilities, all right? So that lays out some definitions, actual principles of universal design, attainability, responsiveness, cognitive load. This goes in progressive enhancement. These are all buzzwords, but as designers, these are the kinds of things that you want to eat for breakfast and be able to talk about and impress potential employers that you had some exposure and understand these things, because these are the kind of things that they'll look to you as a designer to understand and educate, even your employer on things like this. This is very important stuff as a designer. Accessible design principles, that's just talking about modes of access, different things. So a lot of this over on the left here is very, very much kind of definition. And then the laws, this is why I talked about how it started. This goes through like Title II and III of the American Disabilities Act and rules for agencies and funded organizations. These are the actual laws on the books about why we need to care about any of this. And it's a very real thing, right? Legal activity, this is basic different situations in which legal cases have been brought or the context in which they have brought. So a lot of awesome information in here that you can't find in a lot of places. All right, so now we get to the specific guidelines over here. And this is where we can get lost in a sea of information. I'm going to click on color first. And as soon as we get to this, all of a sudden there's a massive sub menu of all of the things going along with color. So we'll just go right into legality and citizenship. Again, talking about the legal requirements of why this is important. And then this even goes through some different statistics, like when we're talking about color blindness, you know, overall of all ages, we're talking about 4.5%, which is roughly 1 in 20 people have some kind of color deficiency. I, have a couple people I work with that are color deficient. I've certainly had students before that have color deficiencies. And it's just something to be aware of as we're designing, that not everyone can see things as you see them, not only on your, if you have a nice MacBook Pro or something, your screen is one of the best screens out there. A lot of people are going to see things on clear screens and the colors will change and look different, even if they don't have any color disabilities. As we go through here, this will kind of talk about the different types of color blindness and what they can see. Low vision, again, just definitions here. You get very, very deep into this stuff. Let's see, now we're going in very specific detail about each of these different kind of areas. So this goes in and explains a little bit about the attainability, a little bit about RGB and CMYK, but all of these go through very specific demonstrations and explanations. This is a good one in terms of like contrast, that this yellow chair in a yellow room would be much harder for a lot of people to see than this. It's really important to kind of grayscale your images and understand visual hierarchy and where you want the user's eye to kind of lead to and all of that different stuff. So there's a lot here I was kind of gleaning over, but do feel free to go through and read this stuff in a little more detail. Responsiveness, that's interesting. That's not really the same thing as kind of web responsiveness. I think this is more talking about how your eyes respond to different color theories and color values and things like that. Less so much how they break down from desktop to laptop to tablet and phone, all of this. Cognitive load, all right, this explains how our brains work a little bit and how we see colors, all this good stuff. I'm actually going to come back to tools. We'll come back to that in a moment because that's going to be some stuff that we'll actually go through. Case studies, this is really, really good for you to look through and see how different images were adjusted. So you can see this one, this is the original image. Number 3 is the adjusted image. And then these are kind of seeing what through the filters are. And you don't see a huge difference here, but you can see the contrast is quite a bit different with the foreground to the background in this adjusted image. And we don't lose all the color value, but we end up with a much more interesting image for someone that has red-green colorblind. Go through different types of imagery showing, basic logos, things like that, just showing a lot of nice different case studies of how these affect final imagery and final media. Lesson ideas, okay, don't worry about that. And tutorials, all right, we've just got basic, more kind of things to go and set up. Right, so what makes a lot of sense here is the tools, all right? Inside of the tools, this goes through, and first of all, and a lot of this is kind of, unless we link to a different site, this is all just kind of created from Bill Fisher, this universal color palette. If you really, really want to be as accessible as possible, Bill's created this color palette, which is very, very limited. You can see there's really not any red in here, right? He's gone through an extreme level of research and development to come up with these things. And this is, in his mind, a very safe color palette that makes it much easier to create imagery and things. If you're illustrating, for example, if you're just working with photos, it is what it is, running through certain filters or changing balances in different ways and trying to come up with things like that can help. But if you're actually illustrating stuff, it might be a good idea to kind of start with a specific color palette. All right, now we're talking about simulators. There's a bunch of different tools on here. I'm just going to kind of show you 2 of them right now to go through, but production tools, there's a lot here explaining different ways we can look at how to view what people might see our images as with different color deficiencies. And I'm just going to show you 2 of these tools real quick. Number 1 of them inside of Photoshop has simple built-in. So I have this awesome baby monkey picture that we used in our hand-coded website that we just got an overview of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in. And there's some tools up here under View and then Proof Setup. All right, under View and Proof Setup, you've got all these different ways to kind of work with different colors. So traditionally, you might be used to seeing like RGB, which is what things would look like on your monitor, versus if you've done any design for print work or anything, you always have to change your color space to CMYK. And you may or may not see a shift in color because it's just different colors are used in monitor colors versus CMYK colors. But also part of this proof setup is down here we have two different color blindness, protanopia and deuteranopia are the two most common types. There's a few other types that are explained in that ICU website. But if we go ahead and choose this, we can see basically what our picture is going to look like to someone that has that type of disability. All right, and so again, it's just under View, Proof Setup, then here's the other type. You can see that change ever so slightly. Now this image itself actually has pretty good contrast between the white and the background, the foreground. That's not too bad, but just kind of built into Photoshop is a very quick check. You can go to Proof Setup, look at these two different types, see if anything gets like completely washed out, what you're really looking for. You just have to think in terms of some people can't see all the colors. So what is important if the colors aren't important? What's important is kind of the message you're trying to convey with the image. What do you want people to see? Can they still see it? Do they have enough contrast to see the focus of what you want them to focus on? What's the visual hierarchy in your imagery? Where do you want their eyes to lead? These are all very much design questions that I want you to just be aware of as designers. These are all things that should be running in your minds. That's what makes you a good designer. And proof colors, it looks like there's a Command Y as a hotkey here. So I can sit here and hit Command Y to go back and forth to see the original image versus kind of the proof that I have. So it's a very quick check in Photoshop. Another really good tool is actually a Chrome browser plugin. All right, if any of you have not played with Chrome browser plugins before, there's a ton of them out there, can do various things. I have a couple of them. You can just look up Chrome browser plugin. The one that I'm going to show you is called No Coffee. If I just Google here, No Coffee Chrome extension, all right, and that'll take us to this Google Chrome No Coffee Vision Simulator. You can get this and download it. And once you install it in Chrome, it will show up under your little plugin button down here, and you can open up the No Coffee Simulator. So what that'll do is, let's see, I am looking at the, make sure I'm looking at Disney.com right here, which, you know, has our super large video with very vibrant colors and very, you know, very much things popping out at us. Very, very good site to kind of check this stuff. And if we open the No Coffee Simulator, and it gives us this box where basically we can preview all of these different, you know, lots and lots, even more than just color deficiency, but let's start there. Down here under color deficiency, we've got none. And then we've got all of these different types, right? So the two that were in Photoshop, this protanopia and deuteranopia, we can see, just like in Photoshop, what things look like. So I want you to notice this main header thing as we go from none, you know, to this. Notice how much contrast and how like this character has a lot of red tint in it, and then the background is very much green. This is a very, very nicely contrasted image. And if we check this, you can see that although someone that has this type of color deficiency, they're not going to see any reds, you can still see the image has high impact. You really see the separation between the character and the background in this situation. As we look down, we can kind of tell that in most of these. I don't really see any that are sticking out as just being bad. You'll see that in other places that may not be as professionally done, where all of a sudden you'll see some images really, really lose focus. So it's a good idea as you're going through your homepage and finalizing your web images, besides just making sure that they are the correct pixel dimensions and the correct kind of compressed the right way, for file size. You also want to make sure that they have good composition, they have good just attention to detail when it comes to your visual hierarchy, and also that when you run them through these different colorblind filters, that they still convey all of the messaging that you would want the image to convey. So besides just the two major ones here, there's also several more minor colorblind, color deficiency, I should say, different aspects here. So there's quite a few here. I'm going to set it back to none. And then above here, these are sliders that you can show just different ways that people have deficiencies. So this will like blur the page. Contrast loss is interesting, that this can kind of gray out things and give you a visual idea of when the contrast starts to lose. If someone's looking at something on a glare, just a lot of tools here. Ghosting, not sure what that is. Oh, there we go. All right. That makes it hard to see. Double vision type there. Snow, cloudiness, people with cataracts. All right. So, I mean, it's nice to kind of look through this, and you don't have to like basically end up with black squares with white letters for everything, but you do want to just kind of check what you've got and see, well, that one just shakes it, and make sure that, you know, things don't just completely blow up, and that you're doing your best to make sure you have good contrast and really good kind of visual acuity in your imagery. Blocked field of vision, different aspects, different ways people might have sight impairments. Large spots. Anyway, I think some of these are, I'm slowing down the page. I'm trying to click on this so fast. All right, different strength. But those are two really good tools. Now, beyond just using these concepts in your design, there's some plugins that we can look into to install just to kind of cover some bases, just like we did with our security. We installed our WP security plugin as one of the first things. We installed either Yoast SEO or the all-in-one SEO plugin. And both of these are ways to just, you know, that you can get really, really deep in either one of those, you know, subjects, but being able to have a plugin that at least covers some bases and make sure you're handling some of the most basic elements of it. We can do the same thing with accessibility. So one thing you can do is if you go into your site plugins and go into add plugin, and then just search for accessibility inside of WordPress, and you'll see a bunch of things come up. So literally like a whole page of accessibility plugins, very much many of them. And the first couple, WP Accessibility Helper, 20,000 active installs. WP Accessibility, 40,000 active installs. One-click accessibility, 50,000 active installs. So I'd probably pick one of these top three. And let's see, I think I've used this one on my site, this WP Accessibility. Let me take a quick peek at it. And we can see some of the things that this does, all right? So it helps with a variety of common accessibility problems in WordPress themes, skips links with user-defined targets, adds language and text direction attributes to your HTML, adds an outline keyword, long description to images, enforces alt attributes on images in the classic editor. There's a whole list of things that can just kind of help you not have a complete gaping hole when it comes to accessibility. Install some kind of accessibility plugin, maybe spend a few minutes looking into kind of what the details are and what it's actually doing, so you can understand and maybe talk intelligently about that with a client or a prospective employer, because I can assure you that is a very hot topic out there. In fact, I know a handful of people around town working in agencies that are specializing only in accessibility, and they're a hot commodity right now. I know a company I worked with for years that just hired someone on specifically just to be an expert in accessibility on the web. You know, maybe something that adheres to you, or it may make you cringe, but it is definitely an aspect of web design and development that is not going away anytime soon. So WordPress in general has, you know, a few accessibility plugins out of the box that help you do some things. There is also a Divi accessibility theme. All right, so I just literally searched for and Googled Divi accessibility, and I found a few things, but I found specifically this free Divi accessibility plugin from Campus Press, and you can see it improves Divi accessibility in accordance with the WCAG 2.0 guidelines. That's these accessibility guidelines that you could learn more about on Bill's ICU site if you wanted, but there's certain levels of accessibility compliance that you can hit. And this again, ARIA attributes, improves keyboard navigation and menus, fixes missing and incorrectly assigned labels. So there's lots of little things that it'll just do for you behind the scenes without you having to worry about. So it might be interested to look into not only the default accessibility plugins that come in when you search for it in WordPress, but also looking around what other people are doing for accessibility inside of Divi as well, including specifically this free Divi accessibility plugin. So plugin for WordPress, plugin for Divi is a great place to start. So this is one of the best tools that you can use to see how accessible your website is. Good idea. This is the Wave Accessibility Evaluation Tool. And this will give you very, very, very detailed information about what your site may have or may be lacking in the accessibility world. And so we can type in, let's see how ESPN.com is doing for accessibility. And we'll give it a moment, and it's going to go through and just try all kinds of things and see what it comes up with. So even a super high-end site like this is going to have a whole bunch of errors and stuff because it's just a new and growing field. But it's very interesting to see that I can go through, okay, here's the summary. All right, and I can look through the actual page here and I can see each of these individual little boxes, these little icons trying to tell me what's nicely accessible and what's not, what could use some help. I can look at the details and see, okay, there are 195 errors, 182 of those are missing alt text on images. Here's a bunch of features. There's a whole bunch of information that you can get typing your site into this. Plug in your domain and poof, look at that. So you have much less errors going on here. You actually have quite a bit of nice things going on for accessibility, so it claims. But as you can see, you can go in and learn, showing me which header tags you have. You can get very, very technical and very, very deep with this. Some very low contrast in a particular area. That's a big one to look out for as a designer. So let me click on this and see it. Does this take us to where it is? I guess not. Now this is just for this particular page. Oh, here, down here, it's complaining about the contrast on this button, which is kind of funny because it's not complaining about it here. So it's obviously not perfect. You can see, oh, what does that mean? And it can tell you all about what it means, why it matters, what to do. This is a very, very, very powerful tool to be able to understand, like according to these accessibility guidelines, what they're wanting you to do. You know, you get out there and are designing and working on the web, accessibility is very, very much becoming part of the process. And more sites and institutions are kind of being held to certain accessibility standards. And this is a great tool to go in and see not only, you know, what it just finds on your site, but how you can deal with it and all kinds of good stuff. So between the default plugins, what I would recommend you all do actually is I would run your site through this wave checker ahead of time before you try and install anything accessibility wise and just kind of see what's going on. And then maybe install one of those one-click accessibility plugins or install the Divi accessibility plugin and then like run it through this again and see what it did for you and just kind of have in your mind what may be possible. So it's something that maybe you could easily fix or things that might seem out of out of the realm of what you want to do for this. But anyway, so very important to just have your mind's eye on accessibility as time moves on. It is very much becoming more and more of a thing that you just need to have in your sphere of awareness as a web designer or a developer.